Buenos días.
Good morning. I'm your admin of today. I have everything you need, an admin would need, especially the axe to fight fires. Sysadmin. When I remember the times when I put together a server every 6 months, sometimes once a year. At the time, what I did was to have a set of scripts, and after I finished with the server, I would load the scripts on the server, and the scripts were in charge of doing all the magic to leave the servers within the policies that I had defined. Those were the good old times. Then virtualization came, and that made my scripts more complicated, because instead of having once every 6 months, it was over one a week. And I went on with those scripts, and I said, no, let's make the most of virtualization. What does that give me? The possibility of using images. So now my servers are images that get copied, and the server appears with the correspondent policies, but in the same way that I take advantage of those images when I create servers, those who request servers take advantage of that, and the servers, in the past, the server would do 60 tasks, and now one server does one task, and usually it's for just one customer. So my servers started to become very specific. So a customer has 15, 16, 20 images, depending on the number of tasks that they have, and that reproduced by the number of customers. Very slowly, I went from being an installer to an image administrator in a virtual system. And that's a big problem. What do I do with the applications? How can I do the maintenance of those servers? I said, well, I'll climb into the package systems. If there are already operative systems that use the packages systems to know what applications they have installed or the version they're using, let's use that system packages. Now we have packages for SUSE Enterprise, for Windows, for Mac OS, for Solaris, for whatever. So I became into an administrator of the packages and started packaging depending on the philosophy of each, and it turned into a very complex thing. In that work, they sent me to the cloud status, and there I have images, of course. I have package systems that I can apply. But now the servers, I don't even know when they are made. The servers appear in my infrastructure, and I don't know whether they're there. As a matter of fact, they appear and they disappear. And of course, I have to guarantee that the policies are implemented, and that the servers are configured as they, and that the users that have the accesses, they have to be there, they are there, and when the user is no longer there, for instance, when a person is no longer working in the organization, the person should disappear from the system. So everything got very obscure until at a conference in Argentina, they talked about Puppet. Puppet is an automated tool, and I said, well, that's my path, and I got into it, and I started working with Puppet. I'm going to introduce him to you. I'm sure that you must have heard about it, but let me tell you, it's a tool that they started to produce in 2005. In 2011, it's an open source with GPL version 2. It has a community of about 3,000 developers, and it's in the 3rd version. What does it do? What does Puppet do? Well, precisely what I came here to tell you. It does the work for me. This is the structure that Puppet uses. I have a central server, the master, and it's in charge of keeping a record of the policies that the different servers or the different machines need to develop in my infrastructure. How does this implementation or that loop, how does it occur? The nodes have the popper customer. That's the puppet. The other one is the master. So the node puppet draws statistics of the setup of the node, the IP, the number of interfaces, the disk, the host name, everything that it has internally, and transmits it to the master. He says, this is me, and sends everything to the master. Those statistics, that's the facts tool that you see there. The master says, well, so you're this, and you have to implement these policies. It develops a list of policies based on the data that the node sends to these data, and it sends it back again. So it sends the catalog, and it says, this is what you have to do, and it goes back to the node. The node is in charge of adapting to that policy through providers. Those providers make me independent of the system that I'm running, so I no longer have the problem to know whether it's Solaris, Reinhardt, Mac OS, Windows. The providers or suppliers know the idiosyncrasy of the operative system they are working with. The node sends the catalog, and the node says, well, they look at what they have to apply, and they draw the table of differences, and they say, well, this is what's missing, and starts to apply the policies. At any rate, and the application of the policies in the node. So it could apply all of them, but those that end up having an effect are the differences. The node applies 100% of the policies, and the difference is the ones that modify the behavior of the node. At the end, when the node finishes applying the policies, sends a report to the master saying, this is what I've done. Once the master receives that, what it does is to handle the infrastructure. That is, of all the nodes, it gives me information of how each of the policies were implemented throughout my infrastructure. That's an easy thing. What made me fall in love with Puppet? What made me say, this is the way? If you have production systems, whatever you're going to apply that entails a big change of the way you work, obviously one is reluctant because you think, oh, I have to start all over again. Now, Puppet allows me to puppetize little by little. What does Puppet let me puppetize? For instance, the cron tasks. Not only can I puppet all the tasks of cron, of all the nodes that I have in my infrastructure, but I can puppet just one. If I say, for instance, database backup task, you do that at 6 a.m. And he's in charge of applying that in all my infrastructure. And if in any node I have to add manually or with a script or I have other tasks, Puppet doesn't mess around with it. Now, once Puppet says, this is the task that I need to have, this is the policy that I need to apply in a certain node, he is in charge of, he sees to it that it happens. Let's imagine, for instance, that users. I say, I need to have a user that is called backup or support in all. Puppet will do it. If for any reason somebody gets into the machine and deletes the user, Puppet will create it again. So it will do the rollback, and I'll have my nodes implementing the policy. So I think that you realize the names are quite self-explanatory. Package allows me to install things of the package system, and it doesn't matter whether it's Deb or RPM, Arch, some other package system. That's not the one that I'm usually handling. I think that this more or less gives you an idea. Let me tell you some cases, because if I tell you how Puppet works intimately, didn't seem very interesting, because you can have an access to that in the documentation. But let me tell you what my experience has been, how I have installed Puppet. One of those experiences is this one. We have it at the university where the journalists study communication sciences. There we have several rooms, 3 rooms, and more or less they have an average of 20 terminals each with a centralized login system, so the students have their home, and regardless the equipment that they use, after validating, they get their screens and their software, whatever they were working with, and he can go to any of the 3 rooms, because the teachers will go with their students to different rooms. So in that terminal, we puppeted 100%. That means that in order for me to provide a terminal, and you have to provide terminals often because in the hand of students, there's a high turnover of users. They break, the keys break, the disks break. So there's a high turnover of terminals. And that means that I will put the Ubuntu, and there I put the Puppet package, I validate the SSH key with the master, and Puppet sees to the rest, and the terminal is operating. What happened to us this year was that we had a new communication channel because they are installing fiber optic. So we had a new communication channel. So we said, why don't we just take the 3 rooms through the new communication channel that we decided to use exclusively for this? The setup of the 3 rooms was just in the master. We touched the files that we had to touch. We had to touch several things because the centralized setup changed things for us, but it was magic. Having finished the master, after touching the master, you would log into any PC and it was working. So in 15 minutes after doing it in the master, the 60 PCs were fully set up. Another example that I've been working with more recently is this one. This is a DNS system for a government agency. It's a DNS that ended up being relatively complex. Originally, we put together this infrastructure. This with the green accent, that's with the green tick, is an administrator that has some DNS master functions. And there we set up all the areas, all the zones, so that the DNS server would work. And the ones at the bottom, the first 3, the ones in gray, light gray, these in light gray are internal, so it responded to the domains in the private, and the dark ones are external. There are 1 inside and 2 outside. So that's infrastructure. That's a structure. If so, from outside, if you consult the domains, there will be 3 DNS servers that respond for those domains. So in order for the data to flow, first we use the standard system that ITIL give us. So we had a system, or the 2 internal systems were slain. They depended on the administrator, and the internal from outside. The black one there was lay inside and was master to the outside so that the two outside could take the sound. If you have ever set up any DNS, you know that it works, that whenever I make a change, the DNS detects the series of my zone and sends reports to all the rest. And all the rest say, oh, I've been reported of a new zone number. They request the zone. And it works, but it works, sometimes it works, and sometimes for unknown reasons it wouldn't work, or it took long, and the notifications didn't work. So we decided to use an infrastructure with Puppet, this one. Now they're all masters. All my servers are masters. That is, none reports to nobody. All of them think, each of them think that they are the lord of domain. So I have a Puppet that continues to be the administrator. When I change one area, for Puppet it is as if I had changed the policy. So the other two puppets say, well, give me the policy that I have to apply, and a puppet realizes it, does the bind, and it's working. 100 guaranteed that any change in my zones, well, I have to change the ID, and I still have a problem of managing the series, but I'm 100% sure that it is left in all my infrastructure. This is a usage that has been quite satisfactory. So, and as I said earlier, one of the things why I fell in love with Puppet was that I could implement it little by little.
And another thing that made me fall in love with Puppet and change the way I worked, and also the teams where I worked, is how the SSH keys are handled. When we are in admin working groups to enter all the servers, well, you use different policies. One can be to share the route key. The other could be you log in with your user, you go to root, or use SSH keys. Now, we gave Puppet the use of the SSH keys. So it is Puppet who registers it. Now, what happens with the server administration policies? What happens if an admin changes from one section to another, or if an administrator leaves the company? They have the route keys. So in some places, what we had was a list of all the servers of the route key which you had. And whenever someone left, we had to check and then change the key of everyone. But with sudo it was different. But let's go to look at the keys. The keys are handled directly by Puppets. One of the functions is to register a given key in order to access, for each user to access. We all have our personal keys. We protect it with a phrase, and Puppet says, well, it has to be present. If someone goes in and deletes it, Puppet generates it once again. Now, if the user leaves, we go to the Puppet master and say, well, we don't delete this key. Now, this key has to be absent, and Puppet will delete it from all the servers where it had been registered. So there's only way that I can connect to the servers, which is through SSH. So we don't have to use passwords, etc. Some had shared passwords. One wrote part of the password, then the other person the remaining of the password. So each person is responsible for their own key, and this is documented. And this is another feature of Puppet. So once we started to use Puppet and state what the policy, the server policy is, then this was documented. We no longer need to document all the changes that we bring about. The master configures exactly what the server profile is. I hope this persuaded you about the great features of Puppets? Well, Puppet was developed in Ruby, and that is why I am here. And the 3,000 Ruby developers, of course, accept collaborations. You can not only work in Puppet, there are other tools that are in the automation. You have the M Collective, which is a tool of orchestrating things. So it can manage clusters and apply policies at cluster level. The dashboard is the graphic interface, which is web, which is the one that is managed by the master with optional. Puppet DB and Hiera are two databases. This was done as from version 3. And it has some things for the previous versions, but these are databases where I keep the manifests. That is to say, those profiles I was telling you that apply to the servers. And Factor is a tool that runs the nodes as in charge of picking up the complete information of the system installed in each of the nodes. So if someone likes any of these things, then there is a code that you can download, you can see it, and you can speak to developers about this, and you can start working. Now, let me tell you that here in Uruguay, Puppet courses are going to be organized. Last year, at the end of the year, there was a Puppet Labs, which is a company behind Puppets, and they prepared a certification grid. You have the Puppet Professional and the Puppet Developer, so that you can get a certification that has to do with Puppet. So this was more or less what I wanted to share with you. So tell you that this is out there and how I have used it. And I'm so glad because now I work less than what I did before. That's what we should try to do. We sysadmins have to work as less possible and we read more emails. Thank you.